One NFL insider wants Mike Tomlin to be able to answer two questions this offseason. If he can't do it, it's time to move on. And those two questions, they're pretty important. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbein. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, there's plenty of questions. And I think right now, while the playoffs are certainly on the top of every fan's mind, the other big question is Mike Tomlin going to stick around? And what is he going to do to fix this team and to remove himself from the, I win games, but I don't win Super Bowls narrative? And one NFL insider has two questions that he has to answer this offseason in order for Art Rooney to bring him back. And right now, I got to say, I don't know if I believe that there's any chance that Art Rooney looks at this situation and says it's time to move on from Mike Tomlin. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a very traditional franchise. They're a group that is as patient as they come. And even if Art Rooney does make the final call, and even if he is walking the line of, I'm starting to miss winning playoff games and it's starting to agitate me, and that is why I moved on from Matt Canada, you got to realize that it took 3 years to move on from Matt Canada. It's going to take a long time because before this year, Mike Tomlin was just viewed as the guy who wins games, who walks away with winning seasons, who is viewed as one of the best head coaches in the NFL. It is this season, and really this season alone, that opened the wide margin of eyes that last year and years prior, there was some buildup. There were fans everywhere, but the Pittsburgh Steelers fans, as a large majority, still said Mike Tomlin is our guy. He's a winner. I mean, you could go back earlier this season. I blasted Mike Tomlin after he made the mojo comment and said that he lies to the media and that he just gives fans and media and reporters a little something. I got blasted for it. I got ripped beyond belief for making that take. I don't even want to call it a hot take, but making that take that I thought it was wrong that Mike Tomlin would lie. And everybody just said, well, he wins. Who cares? That's not a big deal. Nobody cares as long as he wins. That's how long ago, that's how short of a time it's been since this Mike Tomlin thing has become a serious issue in the eyes of the Pittsburgh Steelers world. And that's not enough time for Art Rooney to be sitting there and acknowledging, hey, maybe it's time to move on. But it probably is on his mind, and there have been some team insiders that say that there's really a 50-50 shot that Art Rooney is considering it, and that 50-50 shot is pretty significant. It's a pretty high place to stand. Now, Peter King, NFL insider, says there are two questions that Mike Tomlin must answer if he's going to stick around moving forward. Those two questions are this. During an appearance on 93.7 The Fan, their midday show with Ron Cook and Joe Starkey, Peter King said, quote, I think the one thing that Art Rooney really needs to do when it comes to the postseason decision is you got to decide, are we going to try to bring in somebody from the outside to revamp, maybe redesign our offense? So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I don't think that this is a fatal flaw, but I think it bothers me. It bothers me that Deontay Johnson and George Pickens do not play all out on every snap. It just really bothers me. Somehow, some way, that must get fixed. So those are the two things I wrote this week that I would want Mike Tomlin to come back, but I would want answers to those two questions. And I think every Steelers fan is sitting around, at least a large chunk of them. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers organization as a whole is probably sitting around, at least a large chunk of them, and they have a lot of the same thoughts. Are you going to bring in somebody who is going to completely change this offense? There are no more jet sweeps. There are no more nonsense plays. There is no more George Pickens running two routes in a ball game, and that is as much action as he's going to get. Are you going to fix it? Is this going to be a yes man, Or is this going to be somebody who is up and coming, who really could change the Pittsburgh Steelers offense? And really, is it going to be somebody who, for the first time in a long, long time, you could look at and say, he's probably going to leave soon because he's going to get a job somewhere else? You got to remember, Mike Tomlin doesn't have a coaching tree. And that gets brought up all the time. Why? Because he hires guys who eventually get fired, who eventually their contract runs out, and you've put up with the nonsense long enough that you don't renew it. If I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm sitting around this offseason, and I agree wholeheartedly with Peter King that my first question, my top priority when it comes to whether or not my head coach is coming back, is simple. Who are you going to hire as an offensive coordinator? And is he going to be good enough that people are going to be calling him for head coaching jobs in the next 2 years? Because if he's not that level good, I don't want him around. I don't want somebody who's an offensive coordinator for the next generation. I don't want an offensive coordinator who's going to be here until we get tired of him and then the fans are going to hate him. I don't want another scapegoat. I want an offensive coordinator, if I'm Art Rooney, I want an offensive coordinator who is going to completely ignore Mike Tomlin as a whole, who is not going to sit around and say, oh, well, you like this stuff, we'll continue to do this stuff. I want somebody who's going to come in here with his own ideas, with his own offense, who is going to completely redesign who the Pittsburgh Steelers look like on the offensive side of the ball and hopefully make it better. That's what I want. I want somebody who in 2 years, maybe 3, you have to replace because he left to go be a head coach somewhere in the NFL. That is the bar that I would set. That is the standard that I would have Mike Tomlin meet if I was Art Rooney, whether he was sticking around or not. If my idea was Mike Tomlin is here to stay, there are no questions about it, he is our head coach, my thought would remain the same. The next guy you hire as an offensive coordinator has to be out of here in the next 2 years, maybe 3 years, because the NFL has offered him too many head coaching jobs and he needs to leave. That is the bar that I would like to set. Nothing lower. No yes man. No, this is a guy that's going to be our coach for the next 10 years. Nothing. Go figure it out again in 2-3 years after this offense has completely reshaped itself and our quarterback looks great and our running game looks great and there is enough talent here and enough play call here where you can make anybody look good in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. That is the bar I would want to set. And then you look at the George Pickens and the Deontay Johnson situation, and that's the truth as well. And it goes back to what I talked about yesterday, as in there's going to be issues, and there are issues within the locker room, and former players are calling out the Steelers way and saying it no longer exists because the guys in the locker room do not care about it. And I agree. I think that the Steelers have a wide receiver issue right now. I don't think it's a big one. I don't think that in the NFL it's very easy to avoid a wide receiver issue. I think it's the complete opposite. I think any team across the league, you are probably going to have issues at the position because the position is growing so drastically and these guys are becoming more and more famous and everybody wants to be them and the highlight reel catches and then the money that they're getting paid. The position is exploding with talent. It is exploding with revenue. It's tough to hold these guys back and say, go be Hines Ward, go be Antonio Brown, go be whoever, go 110% every single play. I don't know if you're going to ever fix that if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I would like to see him somewhat hold these guys accountable. And I think that that is a huge, huge flaw with the Steelers this season, is that nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, gets held accountable within this team, especially on offense, because I believe Mike Tomlin is walking such a thin line, that the ice is so thin on the offensive side of the ball with how bad things are getting that he almost uses it as an excuse. Well, I cannot criticize these guys too much. I cannot punish these guys too much, because if I do, if I hold them accountable too hard, too strongly, they might just give up because there's nothing worth fighting for because our offense is terrible. I think it's a double-edged sword. You don't have a reason to believe in your offense, and therefore the guys do not believe in it. How are you going to hold somebody accountable and sit them down and tell them, hey, if you try harder, we'll be better? No, that's not the case. If you hired a better offensive coordinator, we'd be better. If you had a better quarterback system, we'd be better. But it's not me going 50% on a play that isn't going to come my way. That's not the reason that we're struggling. And I get that. I get that from both sides. I get that from the wide receiver side of, why am I going to try when this offense isn't built to succeed? We suck. And there's just no attempt to get me the football on a consistent basis and at least see what I can do. If that's the case, why am I going to try? So I get that. And I get where Peter King's coming from, that it does bother me. It should bother everybody. But I also understand that to a degree right now, there's not much ground to stand on to say, hey, I have to hold somebody accountable. Mike Tomlin didn't hold himself accountable. He didn't hold his offensive coordinator accountable. He hasn't held a quarterback accountable. Why is he going to hold a wide receiver accountable? Why is that the scapegoat? I get it. I think it's a problem. I think it's going to grow and get worse. And unless they hire an offensive coordinator that comes in here and just changes everything and you see a big blast of success, I think the Deontay Johnson, George Pickens worries will just continue to grow. But there's no ground to stand on if you're Mike Tomlin. He's got to fix both of them. I agree 100%. I don't think it's going to be easy, but it starts with the offensive coordinator. And if you cannot fix that, then I'm with Peter King. If you walk in there and say, hey, look, this is our guy, this is who I want to hire, and Art Rooney looks at him and says, this guy's going to be around for 6 years until fans get tired of him and we get rid of him, I think you have a conversation with Mike Tomlin that maybe the Steelers' way has to change, and maybe the organization has to go in a different direction with all their coaches, not just their offensive coordinator.